can help us attain sustainable development.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Yes. आवाज बंद हो गया गाड़ी का डिस्टर्ब
Yes, Balki. Yes.
Okay, sorry, I got kicked out of the
No,
meeting.
I know.
don't know.
Yeah, the line got no issue.
Yeah, so I was looking at how indigenous cultures can contribute to attain the sustainable development goals, and especially on climate action. So I look at the climate change. If we look at climate change today, we have various problems that have come with the advent of climate change. We have problems of food insecurity, because at first, indigenous people, they have all of their resources like food and medication from nature. And with the advent of climate change, there is the issue of hunger that has come into these communities because there is no sufficient food. And these communities are suffering. For example, here in Cameroon, we have the hunter-gatherer communities who they do hunting and gathering for their food, and we have the pastoralists who do livestock, and then they get milk and other dairy products for their food. But with the advent of climate change, there is reduction in all of the amount of food that they used to have. So when we look at it now, there is the problem of food insecurity. So what can we do as indigenous youth or as indigenous people to end hunger? We think that we should try to go back to our indigenous food systems, because we are really losing the indigenous food systems. At first, we have traditional ways of having food. We have the exchange of seeds, like where the one community can exchange seeds with another community so as to plant in the other community so that they can have a good harvest. But nowadays, we discovered that people now use chemicals to farm, use fertilizers and so on, and this has been disrupting the food system. So we don't have original seeds. So if we can go back to preserving our original seeds and then learning how to preserve these original seeds and sharing them with other communities, we think that can make a difference. On climate change, we look at climate change today. We have been talking about so many meetings. In so many meetings, we talk about science, we talk about innovation, we talk about the big things that we can bring, like reduction of emissions through deforestation and forest degradation. But when we look at climate change actions, we think that indigenous knowledge is very key to climate solutions. Because if we look at indigenous people, historically, they have lived closer to nature. And the fact that they have been living closer to this nature has made them to understand this nature and have a link. That is, they have a link that you cannot disconnect an indigenous person from his natural environment. As a result of this interaction with nature, they have indigenous knowledge that they use to preserve nature. You have indigenous knowledge that they use to fight climate change along science. So when we are exploring science, we also try to explore indigenous traditional knowledge. For example, in my community, when the people used to realize that a particular area is dying off and there are no pastures around that area, there are certain herbs that the people will go and cut. The elders will cut the herbs, come and mix it with water, try to sprinkle around that environment. When they sprinkle around that environment, then they leave the area to regenerate. At the end of the day, they use spiritual and traditional knowledge to make that area to regenerate so that they can have pastures for their cattle, and they can also have things like water. When water is drying up, there are certain rituals that can be performed around water areas so that they know that they can always have water. So traditional knowledge is really very important to fight against climate change and its impacts. So we'll also use this traditional knowledge. We look at traditional knowledge-based monitoring systems. Because at first, an elder in the community can just sit, look at the sky and tell you that, okay, look at the environment keenly and tell you that this year the dry season will be very long. This year, this is what is going to happen. There will be less food. So they try to dictate earlier. They try to read the weather, the climate earlier to see the changes that will take place in the near future. And then they try to see what measures they can take to mitigate those how the impacts that can be very harmful to their health and to their livestock. So we think we should encourage young people to learn about these traditional monitoring systems. We should also try to encourage intergenerational dialogues, because we have realized that we are really losing traditional knowledge. As the elders are dying, we are losing traditional knowledge, because these young people nowadays, most of them, they go to towns to go to school. They don't want to come back to the community, and then they look at the indigenous traditional knowledge as a primitive knowledge, and they say, this knowledge is already outdated. The only knowledge that is useful now is the Western education that they can get and the science that they can use, whereas it is very important. So we want to encourage indigenous people to transmit that knowledge to the younger generation through intergenerational dialogues. Looking at our health and well-being, we see that climate change has come with so many problems. Nowadays, we had, like, for example, we had the coronavirus pandemic. We had other pandemics that have come. We have zoonosis that have been affecting people in indigenous communities and livestock. So with these new diseases that are there, where they don't have cures and so on, it becomes a disturbing situation, because these people, they have a system where they are linked to their animals, they are linked to their environment, and they have what we call the concept of one health in the indigenous community. One health, once our environment is in good health, our livestock is in good health, our human beings are also in good health. So in order to ensure this concept of one health, we know that indigenous people are very tough when it comes to traditional medicinal knowledge. For example, here in Cameroon, with the forest communities, they have bark of trees that they use, they have herbs that they use to cure so many ailments for the human beings. And then they also have different type of ethno-veterinary medicines that we use in the pastoralist community to kind of cure our livestock, like the cattle. At first, we did not use us modern veterinary medicines. We look for herbs, we give them to drink when they have certain disease, and the cows, they get well. When we have issues of health, we always try to take traditional medicines. So indigenous people, they hardly go towards medical services. So it's after a lot of sensitization that they started going to medical services. But now with the advent of climate change, we have issues, because not only that we are losing this traditional knowledge, but we are also losing some of the species of medicinal plants that are helping us to cure these various diseases, as well as cure our livestock. So what we have been doing with our organizations like Indigenous People and Sustainable Development Organization, we have been trying to carry out this intergenerational dialogue so that these children can know these plants, and then we try to look at the disappearing species of plants to domesticate. So we open like gardens where we plant some of these plants so that the children can use it to cure their animals and themselves, and then they can also use it like a research center for the future generation, so that whenever there are other children, they can always come around and then they will see that this is the medicinal plant that was already disappearing, that has been domesticated here, and so on. So we look at also valorizing non-timber forest products for marketing, because we realize that these indigenous people of the forest, they do hunting, gathering, and with the garden, they have so many stuff under the non-timber forest product that they can sell. Like we have the bush mango in Cameroon, in the south region, and it is highly valorized because they sell it in and out of the country, and they can make some money out of it. And we know in indigenous communities, women suffer discrimination in the indigenous communities. They don't have much to say when it comes to decision making, and they are financially down when it comes to financial autonomy. So they are highly dependent on their husbands and so on. So, but we have been carrying out activities to end poverty by helping them valorize these non-timber forest products so that they can sell them in their local markets. So in order to, we are looking at rangelands, because our rangelands nowadays have been invaded by unwanted species of pastures as a result of this climate change. So we have been trying to see how we can do to combat this and restore our rangelands by using not only traditional knowledge, also trying to use some of the knowledge that we gain from school, like planting improved species of pastures. We are trying to look at a blend where we can have sustainable development in the sense that we can use traditional knowledge alongside the Western knowledge, alongside science to combat climate change. So we try to plant improved species of pastures. Like we have the Guatemala, we have the Stylo Santos that we have planted in some indigenous communities so that the people can have they can have pastures for their cattle. We also did some tree planting exercise. We realized that trees are very important in the fight against climate change because trees, they can sequestrate carbon, they can regulate the environment, and then they can also help us in water security as well as food security. We tried in some communities to plant trees around water catchments so that we can always have water, be it in the dry season or in the rainy season, we can always have water. We equally try to plant some fruit trees in the community so that they can have fruits that they can give to the children to fight things like malnutrition and so on. And then we so that they can eat some of the fruits they can even sell in the local markets to have a financial autonomy. So we are trying to like blend along the indigenous cultures, along the indigenous traditions. We are trying to look at what can we also add as an added value to the traditional knowledge to fight against climate change. We also try to bring in new and alternative energy sources in indigenous communities because if you look at indigenous communities, we don't have electricity in most of our communities. People have to leave their homes, travel to far distances to go and charge their phones. So we try to put solar energy in some communities so that these people can use the solar energy to charge their phones. They can carry out their financial transactions on phones. They can communicate at real time. They don't have to travel, pay transport to go to town, pay again to charge their phone. So they can always do their things at home and they can have electricity in the evening. The children too have been studying and this has equally improved performance in the children's academic standards. And we have trained them also not to use too much firewoods when cooking because we realize that deforestation is on the rise. They use too much firewood to cook. So we taught them how to build improved cooking stoves that they can use just very little firewood, like one or two small firewoods to cook their food. And then they can start cooking there. And then we train them how to make fireless cooking bags. These fireless cooking bags, they can use them also to, once they start cooking on the fire, they remove the pot or the very high temperature and they place in the fireless cooking bag. They cover it and they keep the food will get ready and the food will remain hot. When the food remain hot, they know that they have their food all day and they can always try in those months to use alternative energy sources so that they cannot use energy sources that can really contribute to causing climate change. As we all know, indigenous people, they contributed least to climate change, but they are the hardest hit in terms of climate change because they live in nature, they depend on nature, their supermarket is in nature, and everything about them is in nature. So their identity, their culture, their way of life, and their traditions are all tied to nature. And that is why we call ourselves the CEOs of the forest and the CEOs of nature. That is why if we want solutions, the solutions are in nature, and we should come back to traditional knowledge and indigenous cultures. That way we can better fight climate change. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Balki. Professor
Very
Roy,
good, very
would you
good.
like to
Yeah.
come in, Professor Roy?
Yes, certainly.
Yeah.
I'm very happy to uh, go through all these points, and some of them are common for India also.
Yes.
For example, the example she has given the traditional knowledge about how to regenerate, the conservation of medicinal plant, conservation of the wildlife, and also how it can be blended with the scientific knowledge. He calls it the Western knowledge. And the challenge which she mentioned is also for us. That means the younger generation are going to school. So they will not inherit the knowledge from the parents of the traditional knowledge. So there's an alarming situation. Some of the rich traditional knowledge may disappear. So how to make a continuity for that? This is one. And the lesson, those things which are very important, it has been practiced over there, how we share through network in other country. So maybe at the end, we can take all the points, but I'm very happy the way she has done it with the clarity and example. Thank you very much, Buba. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And as Professor Roy mentioned, like many things, when you were presenting, we find so many things in common. And the important issues that you have flagged, Buba, while opening through your first presentation in this session, as Professor Roy mentioned, that is how this traditional knowledge, it's important in climate change adaptation and mitigation, integrating traditional knowledge for monitoring climate, the rituals that helps in protecting, conserving the nature can be protected, how the intergenerational transmission of such knowledge should be there. And you also have mentioned about a very important area, that is One Health, the zoonosis, and how these issues can be tackled, the zoonotic diseases and the One Health issue. Then domestication of the plants which are getting endangered, rare, this medicinal plants, NTFPs, spatial pasture development, and energy use, how we can integrate renewable energy uses in our daily life, as well as reduce the use of firewood. And you also mentioned about the natural systems of keeping the food warm, how these indigenous practices can be evolved and integrated. So thank you very much for flagging these important issues. And we will be, in the course of discussion, will certainly come back to you to have answers. I'll request our participants to keep your questions for Buba. You can also write in the chat box and we will come back to you. With the permission of the chair, may I now introduce our second speaker for the session, our dear friend, Daniel Kobe. Daniel is the founder and executive director of Ogiek People's Development Program, OPDP, a Kenyan-based NGO working to secure human and land rights of the indigenous Ogiek community and other indigenous peoples across Kenya and Africa. He represents indigenous peoples under the umbrella of the International Indigenous Forum for Biodiversity, under the Collaborative Partnership for Wildlife Management, set by Convention of Biological Diversity. He is also an indigenous people's human rights defender and has led numerous high-level discussions on indigenous peoples in various forums across the world. He led the Ogiek to winning an 8-year legal battle over land and human rights abuses at the African Court on Human and People's Rights based in Arusha, Tanzania on May 2017. He has been promoting the restoration of the Mo Forest Complex through Ogiek community involvement as a forest-dwelling hunter-gatherer community. So I welcome Daniel, and the floor is yours now, Daniel.
Thank you very much, Ratma. Really, it's a pleasure to having met you not once through this. I hope we'll meet one day physically so that we can discuss more about our network, how we can work together. Having been in India some years back, it always gives me a bit of nostalgia when being in Indo and Bhopal some years back. Give me a lot of nostalgia to really integrate again. So namaskar, all of us, and God bless you. Today, I'm more or less repeating what my sister Buba has been discussing, but let me discuss in a more interactive way about the pathway of indigenous peoples and their cultures. And I was looking, and I've been seeing the 17 SDGs, and I thought if I was told to reorganize, I was going to put SDG 15 to be number 1, about life on land. But I was not there when they were setting up the SDGs. So I will have to allow myself to join the team. But let me discuss and say that when you discuss about indigenous peoples, you have to link it with their land and territories, because everything else follows. Because our life is on land. Our life, as my sister was saying, we see land and forests as a supermarket for indigenous peoples, because that's where we get everything from our medicine, our food, and all that. For the Ogiek community, we call ourselves Ogiek, means caretakers of flora and fauna. We have our link with conservation, that we see that we are part of conservation. And the issue of climate change also came in. But I always tell people, when you talk about poverty for indigenous peoples, I think we never used really to know what poverty means, because we were living with nature, and nature gave us food, gave us everything. So we never had that measure that now we are living in poverty. It was only when the statistics came in and indexes came in, then it classified people into looking at that this one is poor, this one is, but we used to link poverty to people who are lazy, people who are not ready to work hard, to look for food and to work for their lifestyle. So let me discuss first when we talk about restoration, because for us as a community, we always do restoration, and we are trying to let the world know that communities can be the best leaders in conservation. They can give the indigenous knowledge or traditional knowledge on conservation. And that's why we have been having our Ogiek scouts in Mau Forest Complex in Kenya, and also trying to let the people know that let's not wait for the government, because many countries, they say the government has not done this. I remember one of the famous presidents in America, which says that, what have you done for your government yourself? So we need to say, what have we done for our conservation? So we are working with the women, with the youth, to see that we conserve Mau Forest Complex as a sign that really the issue of climate change, which is affecting a bigger area in Kenya, and most recently, we saw that pastoralism, which are also indigenous issues, which my sister also mentioned, that a lot of cows died in part of Kajiado and the rest, and it's because there's a restrictive land tenure system now. People used to move when one area is dry, they move to another area, but now you are confined to the areas because of land tenure system in the country. We do not allow that long movement as it used to be before. Another issue is related to health. Our forest is where we get our medicine, and as COVID was there, many of the people came to our forest to get medicine. People started going to, because they saw that cities is where they are COVID-19. So they used to come to our forest, and everybody's fleeing the city to the villages and the forest, so that they cannot interact with the COVID. So that when people realize the importance of protection of our forest. And this way also we do our tradition, where we perform our spiritual rituals and the rest. And this must be affected, despite of the move with Christianity and other religion. We sometimes look at our culture as very barbaric, or it cannot be really, it does not measure the contemporary way of living. So, but it's a lot I can discuss, because like now, when we talk about our livelihood, how our livelihood, about beekeeping, and the people, they say they see the new standard of making beehives. Our people still tell us that the indigenous beehives produce more honey than the new Kenya Toba hives and the rest. So we still feel they should only be enhanced and promoted, so that all these can take place without any problem. So the industry, or the way we do our beehives, should also be promoted as one of the ways, some of the culture. For education, if you tell people in my community what is SDG and tell them to say in their language, they really need to really come up with terminologies. So some of these things should be demystified or domesticated so that we even understand in our language sustainable development goals. What is it? And how we see it going deeper to the people so that they can embrace and mainstream in their lives, and so that, because when we do even in our education, we must promote our own languages. So language plays a role in all the SDGs, and of course some of the renewable energy issues, which I sort of mentioned about the solar system, which Africa is very hot, just like part of India, very, very hot indeed. So you can have as much solar as you want. So these are some of the things, and we are promoting to the community to accept that they should use solar in their homes, because not all the areas have received electrification. So in many villages, they don't have, so which also promotes education. This is a repeat of what my sister said. And this will help the communities really to understand that we need to do this thing, not only for climate change, also for the future of our children in their livelihood. Transfer of knowledge, like most recently as a Gir community, we have started what we call more or less like Iberium, or rather a place where we teach the younger generation to accept herbal medicine and other medicine, because as Masa say, how will you be handling bugs and leaves and roots and saying this is medicine? People want to go to the pharmacy and they get their tablets and whatever. But with all these new changes in the world, people have now realized, oh, it is also good to know how to deal with herbal medicine, because it can help in many ways. And then as I'm about to really finish is the kind of partnership we should have, 17, is that the academic institution like yours and many others should really partner with indigenous peoples so that they really understand the basics, the real issues. The other day when we have been having land issues as part of our work, and then the government said, I told them, well, when you discuss about Ogiek in Nairobi, have you been to Mao? Do you know what you are discussing? So can you please begin to understand what you are discussing? Can you visit? When they visited last week, they realized, well, we didn't know how much knowledge indigenous people are endowed with, which makes it clear that people should integrate and work closely with indigenous people. Otherwise, they will miss out and will only be receiving documentation with references in places we don't know where the references originated from. And finally, we are just very academic and not realistic. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Daniel, our dear friend from Kenya. And your presentation, as always, is so focused and so illuminating. Professor Roy, kindly have your comments.
Yes, thank you, Daniel. It is a pleasure to listen to you once again. We had in previous occasions listening to you. Of the many things about the challenges which now the people are facing because of the restriction of the movement, migration, when it's getting dry. So they used to move earlier to the places where the water will be available. So this is a challenge. Then also about the SDG, which is started in the beginning, how that SDG 15 should come first. That's very interesting. And of many points, what is very important for all of us to learn, he mentioned about the teaching the younger generation about the how to keep the harmony of the earth. This is very, very important, because normally we teach either biodiversity or the soil or the water, technical thing, one or two in isolation. But keeping earth in harmony is very important. And I think, Raktima, we can have a separate session with Daniel about the experiences of this and the module and how he teaches. And it can be used in many places in our country also. So thank you, Daniel. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Professor Roy. And the issues that Daniel has flagged off, I just want to summarize for the participants to keep your questions ready for Daniel if you have any or clarifications. Like the first point that he mentioned, he considered, his community considers themselves as the caretaker of forest, of the nature. So that is very, very important. And what he mentioned, like instead of blaming others what they're doing, let us introspect what we are doing for the nature. So that kind of the mindset, that kind of philosophy that they are promoting from their community, it is a very important learning for all of us, like how we take responsibility and not just blaming others. Then as Professor Rao has already mentioned, like intergenerational part that he has mentioned, and how community can come forward as the leader for conservation. He has also mentioned certain points like this beekeeping and how the traditional method of beekeeping, actually it was giving more products than the method that is promoted now. So again, there is another area where we need to just have a kind of a thorough analysis between the traditional way of doing the thing and what we are promoting, and see how this can be blended. So again, it is a very important point. Just instead of just rejecting one thing, we should validate what is actually giving us what result about the indigenous renewable energies, and also, of course, about the SDG thing, which he has mentioned, and the final part, the partnership, how we can develop partnership amongst different actors, stakeholders from across the globe. So thank you so much, Daniel, for bringing in so many important issues in the form of this panel discussion. So be with us, please. We will come back with the questions, clarifications from the participants. And again, with the permission of the chair, may I now introduce the third speaker of this session today. This will be sharing of experiences from Ethiopia. And again, we are very happy, privileged to have with us two young scientists, Femke van Wozik. She is working as a program manager at Meta Research and is based at the Netherlands. Her work focuses on managing and improving local climates to create conducive and resilient conditions for both ecology and agriculture. She has an educational background in both water science and international relations. As a water professional with an interdisciplinary background in water science, political science, and sustainable development, she is passionate about landscape restoration, creating more conducive local climates, water governance, and implementing integrated water resource management solutions. And with Femke, her colleague, Yosef Cherinet, who is the program manager assistant in Ethiopia of the Green Future Farming Project, he is with us. And both of them, they will be sharing their experiences from Ethiopia from this project of Green Future Farming. One of the objectives of this program is to locally implement better agriculture and landscape management practices for improving the local climates. These are very innovative, and I believe that all of you will appreciate how the indigenous knowledge are blended with the scientific knowledge for coming to the solutions for local climate management. So welcome, Femke and Yosef.
Yes, thank you so much, Raxima. We prepared some slides to also share some pictures with you. Is it okay if I share them?
I have given multiples. Yeah, it's coming.
Yes.
It's already coming. Yes.
Good. Okay. Yeah, so my name is Femke. I'm working with Meta Meta, and I will start during this presentation to briefly explain the local climate management concept that Meta Meta is working on and that we're also implementing in Ethiopia. And after my quick introduction, my colleague Joseph will take over and share some more concrete examples from Ethiopia. So yeah, local climate management is one of the topics that Meta Meta is working on. And we really see this as a inclusive, more bottom-up strategy for addressing climate and water crisis. So usually when we talk about climate change, we talk about mitigation and adaptation. And these two strategies are, of course, highly important. But we also think they are a bit not super proactive. So that's why we came up with this third way approach to really focus on a more inclusive and bottom-up and really proactive strategy. Yeah, and we really use this to create more conducive local climates and really doing this really intentionally by proactive, well-considered and measurable action, because it's on such a local scale, it's also very measurable. And that's, of course, highly valuable to also steer landscape restoration efforts. The fact that it's so local is that we can do this area by area and therefore creating a mosaic of stronger local climates and really taking the local context into account. So it's based on really well-considered local action. And this also highlights the use of indigenous knowledge that the two previous speakers, Bakisu and Daniel, already put central in their speeches, which was very interesting. And we also really aim to put these indigenous knowledge central in this local climate management approach. So maybe before I continue and give the word to Joseph, I will quickly explain what we think about when we are talking about local climates. So here you see a map of the northeast of India. This is on a macroclimate scale, so it's really wide. And the climate here is really determined by the distance from the sea, the different seasons, the latitude, the altitude. It's really hard to control this climate, right? Like you don't, as a human, we don't really have influence on this. But then when we zoom in a bit more, so this is still the same region, but then on a smaller scale, you already start to see that the actual landscape has influence on this mesoclimate level. And then the good news is that if we zoom in even more, so this is on a scale below 100 meters, so farm level scale, this is what we call the microclimate. And here you really see that the presence of windbreaks, if there are hedgerows, if there are shading, if there are soil moisture conservation efforts, all these little things that we can do on a landscape actually can impact this level of microclimate. And influencing both the micro and the mesoclimates is what we call local climates. And through that, we try to implement local climate management. So the fact that the land surface is really variable, it actually results in a mosaic of different micro and macro climates spread over landscapes. So even on a farm scale, you can see very large differences. This is a farm in Chile, and you actually see on this map that the areas where there's less soil moisture are also way warmer. This is another map where you can see the cooling effect of vegetation cover in Metahara. It's in Ethiopia. So you really see that on areas where there's less vegetation, you directly see that the temperature is going up. And the fact that all these differences in landscapes result in such different local climates is actually really good news, because this means that we can intervene in the landscape and through that actually improve the local climate. And this is what we call local climate management. And as I said in the beginning, we really see this as a third way to deal with climate change next to adaptation and mitigation, as it really has the potential to reduce the temperatures by 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius, which is in the bandwidth of the global warming threats that we are facing. And the real benefit of this is that it can be managed really locally, which also highlights the importance to integrate indigenous knowledge and local cultures into this approach, which also, yeah, of course, it's central to the approach and it makes it way stronger. These are two maps that show some of the interventions that can be done on a landscape to improve the local climate. but Joseph will, in his talk, elaborate a bit more on how we did this in Ethiopia, and especially how we included the local communities into this approach in Ethiopia. To really achieve this social inclusion and empower local communities and incorporate this indigenous knowledge into climate strategies. So things that we find that we put really central in this local climate management approach is this more holistic ecosystem understanding and the cultural empowerment and fostered sense of ownership, which of course in these land and water restoration projects will also enhance the sustainability for long term. I will now give the floor to Joseph.
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you. Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mamka. Thank you very much all. My name is Joseph Chernat. I'm working in Ethiopia for Meta. I'm a water resource management expert. So I'll share with you some of our national and project perspective approach. So in Ethiopia, we have this national campaign-based watershed management programs. It was there for a long period of time, but it was supported by the government at different stages, so reinitiated in 2011-12. So the aim is just to cover large areas with a minimum cost, and also by engaging more local farmers to take ownership. So it focuses on sustainable management strategies through mobilizing the local communities. So next please. Next. Yeah, so our Green Future Farming project is really working hand on hand with this program, so that we are actively working on in Amhara, Oromia region of the country, where there is rich natural resources like land, water, and forest. But there is a struggle to manage these resources in a sustainable way. So both regions are face challenges related to this natural resource management. So in order to address this challenge, we are working closer with the lower part of the government administrative, which is, I can say, the lowest administrative units of the government, which is Kabale level, Warada level. So we are highly working with integrated with the community, especially to address and engage their active involvement. So involving this or mobilizing these communities help us to ensure the local ownership. Of course, their active involvement really supports and reboosts their ownership. So these participatory approaches are used to identify especially their needs and priorities at the community level, and also empowering communities through knowledge sharing, capacity building on different areas. For example, we provide small micro enterprises with the skills to handle business. Especially, we provide also trainings to people who are participating in soil water conservation measures on different businesses, establish them and give them revolving funds to support and to keep them engaged at the local level. So yeah, it's. So this is one of the examples that you see here in Guba Lafto Warada, one of our active areas in Amhara region, so that activities are done using the local communities, especially soil water conservation activities to keep, for example, erosions, to control erosions and reforestation practices. So the communities are actively participating. As I said, they have, as a government level, they have a program which is led by the Agriculture Office. Each community members will participate about 60 working days. So in this campaign, so we use that opportunity to support them through different capacity building methods. We provide also supports like materials, and also organize them into small businesses which can engage them in actively there. So next. This is also another Warada areas in Amhara region where community are mobilized to work on this soil water conservation works.
their knowledge is really critical because climate change is really affecting them at the local level. So when we work, when we bring solutions, so it should be from their side because they know their ecosystem very well. They know what was the ecosystem before and after. So they know also the cause. So getting that in this indigenous knowledge and work together with the local experts and also farmers is really critical because, for example, if you want to do afforestation or any reforestation practices, so we have to have the knowledge, the local knowledge, so that which tree species or plant species are surviving there, so to regain the local ecosystem. So yeah. Next, please. Yeah. So in general, we have some conservation measures which are done by these activities: soil water conservation techniques, afforestation, reforestation programs, watershed development initiatives, sustainable agriculture practices. For example, one of the challenge here is, for example, in Ethiopia, is that we have chemical fertilizer shortage, high shortage. So even at the presence of the demand, I mean, the supply, there was really big challenge to sustain the environment in nature-based solutions. So we introduced biofertilizers, which can be produced at a local level by the farmer themselves without having too much costs, so that they can use a sustainable approach. Yeah, next, please. Yeah. So these are some of the activities which are done by the communities. They construct gullies, protect gullies, and also they construct bands in their farm because most of even hilly areas, if you see a higher slope, they are farming the area. There was really big deforestations in that area. So we are highly working with the local communities to afforest the areas to recover the ecosystem. Here you can see another examples from community mobilization activity of construction of gabion dams, especially to protect soil erosion and to reduce this erosion, especially to make more water available downstream side for agriculture. So we can improve, we mobilize the communities to actively engage such kind of practices. So in general, the achievements and the impacts are tremendous. So we have positive impacts on land degradation reduction, especially in area where there is high afforestation, improve water availability and quality, especially at the downstream side of these highly recovered areas, enhance agricultural productivity and food security, biodiversity conservation and ecosystem restoration. So yes, there are, even if these activities are bringing positive outcomes, there are still challenges, lessons learned. So community mobilization, sustaining the interest is really a big challenge. And also adaptive management in continuous learning process is really important. Collaboration with government NGO for resource and expertise, especially, yes, the government has the program, but there are a lot of supports are needed, especially from partners at local level, at different stakeholders. So the future plan and sustainability, when you see it as a GFF project, we have a plan to expand it into more areas, especially this support, this knowledge work and capacity building activity in both regions. If possible, also, we are expecting to go out beyond these regions and to reach other areas. So strengthening also local institutions, cooperatives for sustained management, advocacy for policy and support funding community-based initiatives. Because now currently, yes, communities are mobilized and restored areas, especially, for example, they implement area closure activities, but they really need ownership. So that ownership is coming from the government side. They should get license for the land. In Ethiopia, the policy doesn't allow peoples to own land. So land is the land ownership belongs to the government. So, however, these communities need that ownership in order to actively maintain that restored areas. So with the project support, we help to establish and institutionalize especially local community watershed users. So they have the legal entity so that they can benefit from their contribution through different activities. Because, for example, in the area closure, they can parallelly engage in different income generating activities like beekeeping and others. So that area, in this way, we can support the sustainability. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Femke and Joseph, for the presentation. And as always, it has been a pleasure listening to you, especially when we all talk about the climate change problems. Here, Femke comes with the solutions. So this is the silver lining. So that is very, very important. How through this local level initiatives, we can control, manage, and improve our local climates, which they have been doing in Ethiopia, and Joseph has presented the cases of the activities, actions that they are taking. So it's very interesting. Yes, Professor Roy, may I have your comment, please?
Thank you, Pemcha, this has been, as Rakima mentioned, one of the outstanding project where instead of talking about the challenges, problem, what does not work, it has solution, and with example what it works. Particularly when they started with the macro relationship, then finding at the local level, it has been a very challenging job to mobilize the people, involve them, build their capacity, particularly the local level action, and also how in the adverse situation during deforestation or the climate, they have found the solution. And then they have also got a very good future plan about how to expand, mobilize, strengthen, and continue advocacy for the community support from different corners. So it has been very, very interesting, and it was self-explicit at all the slides. Outstanding indeed. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Professor Roy. And with this presentation from Ethiopia, we have learned about the nature-based solutions, which the world is now talking, struggling, promoting. So that nature-based solutions, and along with that, two important issues beyond the intervention, direct interventions in the form of nature-based solutions, which Joseph has raised on the tenurial right issues, which in many countries, many experiments are taking place in our country also. Through Forest Rights Act, these tenurial rights are given to the communities, to the indigenous people. So we can also share experiences from India, how it has been done here, and the legal issues of providing the legal backups of the community level institutions. So thank you very much for flagging the issues. Here I can see in the chat box some of the questions mentioned directed to Daniel and Joseph as well. So I'll request Daniel and Joseph to kindly note the questions from the chat box, and we will come up at the end after the presentations of three more participants will come for discussion with the questions. So now, with the permission from the chairman, may I now introduce our next speaker for this session. Very important and very one of the very well-known face in the field of this conservation from Africa, Mr. Legborsi Saro Pagbara, He is the Executive Director of the Indigenous Center for Energy and Sustainable Development, ICESD, and former president of the Movement for the Survival of the Ogoni People, representing the interests of the indigenous Ogoni people in Nigeria's Niger Delta. Before assuming his present role, Mr. Payagbara had been the International Advocacy Officer for the movement, during which he led the organization's robust engagement since 2004 with negotiations on the Rio Conventions, particularly the CBD and the UNFCCC. He had been involved in designing and implementing policies and programs focused on restoring biodiversity and mitigating climate change impact, and working with government institutions, civil society organizations, and indigenous communities on capacity building, adaptation, and mitigation. He is the Indigenous Peoples Observer for Africa on the Strategic Climate Fund Trust Fund Committee and on the Scaling Up Renewable Energy Program Subcommittee of the Climate Investment Fund. So we welcome Mr. Payagbara as our next speaker for this session. Mr. Payagbara, please. He was here, but I don't know whether his line got disconnected.
Hello.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
Saru. Yes, Saru.
Welcome.
Welcome, Saru.
Okay. Thank you, Ratima and Prof for arranging this webinar. I also want to thank my fellow panelists that have spoken earlier before me. I think we are at a very important point in our history as a people, as humanity as a whole, where we are dealing with some of the biggest challenge of our time. I mean, climate change, pollution, and biodiversity loss. I come from the Ogoni community in Nigeria, where have been the center of what you may call the energy dispute in the world, because of it being a bed that has oil. And because of oil, we have all the multinational corporations led by Shell operating in the Niger Delta, where, of course, Ogoni is situated. And because of this battle for energy, battle for oil, and the rest of them, our community have had a fair share of what you may call the present climate crisis. All of us know and agree that the climate crisis presently also being driven largely by the hydrocarbon exploitation that have been going on. And we happen to have been one of those communities where there have been intense and of course intensive exploitation of oil and gas in over 50 years. And that has led our communities to become an environmental, what some people may call environmental monster. The Ogoni community had been a community where we see ourselves as nature, and because in our community, we live with nature and nature live within us. So we always say we live in nature and nature live in us. That is the way we see our community. And that is why in Ogoni, issues relating to animals, issues relating to our animals, issues relating to our plants, issues relating to our water bodies, issues relating to life, of course, is very, very important for us as a community, because we feel that our life is out of balance when there is something that goes wrong with our forests, when there is something that goes wrong with our rivers, when there is something that goes wrong with even the air that we breathe. So I think that was the basis of what we may call the Ogoni environmentalism, because our entire worldview, our entire life is situated around these provisions of nature. And that is why, of course, for us, it became very challenging when the activities of the oil industry started destroying our plants, started destroying our water bodies, started destroying our farmland, because Once that happened, we became completely out of balance with nature, with our forests, with our trees, with our rivers, with our land. And of course, that completely, of course, disrupted our pattern of life. And that, of course, posed its own challenge. We've lost quite a lot of biodiversity because of the oil extraction that have been going on. Today, our fathers, we used to, particularly in the area that we are today, we used to do more of rain-fed agriculture. Now, because of the change in weather, our people are beginning to have big challenges in terms of looking at when to go to farm, when to come out of farm, when in the farming season. And because in the Ogoni, farming season is not just a mere activity. It's an activity that's tied in our culture. So whenever we are going to commence our farming season, it's a time that both our spirituality and everything is put together for the community to worship, for the community to do their celebrations. Recognizing the intricate relationship between our plants, between our farming seasons and us. The same thing applies to the harvest season. As I speak to you now, this is the harvest season between July, August, September is the harvest season in Ogoni. And because this is a harvest season, this is also the time that we have all the celebrations, all the cultural activities are going on in different communities now, because our harvest season also coincides with when we do most of our cultural festivals. So you can see that we have a strong relationship between what we do on our land and what we do in terms of our cultural festivals and cultural activities. And that is part of the thing that we promote as indigenous community. This is part of what we bring to humanity, that every action that we do have a bearing on our life as sustainable human being, as sustainable life. But one thing that is very important for us as an organization today is, of course, we all appreciate the role that biodiversity is playing or has played or continue to play in the issue of climate change. How do we protect our trees? How do we protect our herbs, particularly when it comes to even the SDG 4, the 3, and when in terms of health? Because our traditional medicine is centered around our health, around our traditional herbs, traditional plants, and all that. How do we protect all this? And that for us has become very important, particularly when it comes to the issue of language protection. Today, we are talking about pathways for integration of indigenous cultures into climate. Without our language, can we really transmit our ways? Can we really transmit our cultures? Can we really transmit even the knowledge we have about the herbs, about our plant, and the role each of these trees play in our life? Can we even transmit even recognition? Because in my area, we use birds before to define how our weather is changing. There is when certain birds appear and we know that this season has set in. My grandfather used to teach us by mere studying of sunrise and sunset. You know when the time is 12 o'clock. You know when it is 3 p.m., you know when it's 6 p.m. by mere studying the movement of the sun. Now, how do we sustain that for millennia? They did it before, but because of modernity, some of those things were lost. So what we are doing now in my community is to see how we are reviving the study of our language. Presently, with the support of Pawanka, we are putting together some of our language, some of those relating to herbs, some of those relating to how we study our own, what we may call cosmology, how we study the star, we study the sun, with that predict what can happen in the next few days and the next few days. So that is part of what we are doing as an organization presently in the Ogoni area. And in all this, we are looking at the central role of language. Because without language, we can't transmit even our knowledge of medicine. Without language, we can't transmit even our knowledge of the herbs and the trees and the plants that our people have used before now to deal with issues of health, to deal with even issues of hunger. There are certain species of plant that our people have discovered because in the last few years, we've been dealing with question of flooding. But between that, our people also have a knowledge of certain plants that we've been planting before that are also flood resistant. So some of those things are part of what we're putting. That is the only way we can address the question of hunger that are risen because of the constant issue we're finding around the issue of flooding some of the things we've not been seeing before in our area. In the last 2 years, we've had intense flooding in most of the communities around. So we are now finding a way adapting to it. And some of the plants that we identified and some of those plants over the years that we found to be resistant to floods. So we are putting that together, helping our communities to see how that can be promoted. But I'm looking at what my brother Daniel talked about, the issue of partnership. I think partnership is very, very important in all this. Goal 17 of SDGs. If we don't start looking at how to build partnerships, and this partnership for me is part of what we are doing here. This sort of cross-cultural learning from India, from Cameroon, from Ethiopia, from all that is part of the partnership that we have to build across board, across regions, across different continents, for us to learn from ourselves, to learn from our individual experience, community experiences, and that to us is the way to go. Outside that, even from community to community, like part of what we're promoting here, what is good in this community? How can we ensure that the other community also learn from what is good in this, or what has been successful? Because for us, that is the way to go. That is the only way to deal with some of the crises that we're facing at the moment. And for us, I think that worked well, it's going on very well in terms of community partnership in learning and also in action. And for us in Ogoni, in fact, that is what I saw. I helped us to succeed in the campaign that we've done against the oil industry. It allowed me promoted by that level of community partnership in a joint action. So for me, issue of community partnership is very important, not just the global partnership, but even community partnership is very important. We must hold our language very strong in this whole thing. Part of the greatest assault that we've seen in some ages has been an assault on our language. When the colonizers came and when people came with their own so-called new knowledge, what they did to transmit those new knowledge in their own language and force our people to start learning those language. In order to be seen to be civilized, most of us abandon our language, take on the new language that cannot even be used in our spirituality because our so-called God may not be ready to listen to us, even doing our own spiritual exercises in those languages. And so that is the reason why, for us, the issue of language has become very central in whatever thing we are doing around the climate crisis, the biodiversity loss. Language has to be something that we must look at. Of course, around goal 11, I mean, talking about responsible consumption and production, we are also using that as a basis to encourage our community to look at some of those things that were introduced to us that we think are not necessary, should at this point be abandoned. There are certain ways of life that were very sustainable before, that we were using before, that when people came with their new ways, we abandoned. But today we are saying, no, those were very sustainable ways of living, that we need to go back to those ways of living. We need to go back to those things that were taken before, that we abandoned in the course of trying to copy the world, trying to look civilized. But today we found that those sort of things that were told us civilized way of life are actually ways of life that are destroying our biodiversity, destroying our earth. So today we must go back to those local ways, those traditional ways of life that was sustainable and have been recognized to be very sustainable, recognized to be climate friendly, and recognized to be biodiversity friendly. So those are some of the things I thought we should share today. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Saro. These are really, your presentation is so insightful and full of wisdom, I should say. The way you have introduced, like, we live in nature and nature live in us. That philosophy, it is so important, and the balance that you were mentioning. If the balance of the nature, it is not maintained, then our life balance is also gone. So that deep-rooted philosophy, that deep-rooted concept that you have in your community, it needs to be promoted amongst all of us. Thank you so much. And Professor Roy, if you can have your comment, please.
Thank you, Rekma. You have already mentioned the important points what he has mentioned. So I can only add the way he mentioned about the partnership and scope for learning from different community, maybe what is their indigenous knowledge, how they are managing, how through festival during harvest, they maintain the ritual that reinforces the knowledge and social system. So we can think of such kind of partnership, sharing knowledge from different countries and document. And Sarah can take lead in this kind of networking for the international. We'll be very happy if you take the lead for networking in partnership, particular for the learning together.
Yes.
Each
And
community have got very rich knowledge. So before it disappears from the earth, it has to be documented, shared for the next generation. Thank you.
and the sustainable way of living that you have mentioned, how we can have it documented and promoted, and the basic philosophy of this keeping balance between nature and the people, the harmony which Daniel, Buba, you, all of you have mentioned and reiterated. So it is really very nice to listen to you, and how these indigenous cultural practices we all could understand help in contributing towards achieving the goal of SDGs, all the goals I say, how this can help. So thank you so much, Saro, and we look forward to have more such interactions with you and having a kind of a network to work together. So with Professor Roy, Chairman's permission, I'm having the honor to introduce our next speaker of this session, Professor Amit Kumar Kisku from India. Professor Kisku, he is a professor and head of the Department of Anthropology with Vidyasagar University. He has done his studies in anthropology and PhD from London University. His research interest includes common property resource management, indigenous knowledge of biodiversity conservation, indigenous politics and anthropology at home, as well as indigenous identity and environmentality of the Santhal jungle Mahals. So may I request Professor Kisku to kindly share his thoughts with us. Professor Kisku, please.
Thank you. Am I audible?
Yes, yes, you are.
Yeah, but perhaps my video is not working.
Yeah, we cannot see you. It's
Yeah.
so I'm sorry that we cannot see
Yeah.
you. Yeah, but we can hear you, Professor Kisku.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay. So thank you. I must thank Professor S.B. Roy and Dr. Raktima Mukherjee for giving me this nice opportunity to represent India. I mean, belonging to one of the indigenous group of India. So I think, but as I'm representing one of the indigenous people, one of the indigenous group of India, and as here in the in this here are we have friends from the other parts of the world. I think I must a bit introduce the indigenous people of India, how they are, and I mean like what their situation is at present. Before going into the going into my main talk, India is home of more than 700 indigenous groups who comprise about 8.6% of the total population of the country. So this must be known. They are also officially recognized as scheduled tribes, and 75 ethnic groups out of them are categorized as particularly vulnerable tribal groups. They are, in short, they are called PVTGs, because this 75 ethnic groups, they have their dependency on hunting gathering for food. They use still use kind of pre-agricultural level of technology. They have very low or almost stagnant, even in some cases, a declining population growth. And last but not the least, they have extremely low level of literacy, these PVTGs. The scheduled tribes of India, or the indigenous people of India, they have been known by different names in different times, such as Dasas, the Sayus, Asuras, Banavasis, Janajatis, and so on. But at present, mostly the educated amongst them, I mean, the educated amongst the indigenous group, they prefer to call themselves as Adivasis and the indigenous people of India. Interestingly, this, but the government of India, it's yeah, has never recognized. I mean, officially, uh, uh, the scheduled tribes are not recognized as the indigenous people of India. But this is more interesting that the Supreme Court of India, in an order first in the year 2011, expressed that these people, these Adivasis, are the original inhabitants of India. And the term Adivasi is the Indianized form of the term indigenous people. Uh, uh, yes, the government of India, even since the British period, we cannot deny that it has been sympathetic to some extent to the tribes, and has initiated a good numbers of plans and programs. Most notable of them are the constitutional safeguards and separate development plans for the tribes of India. But this is also undeniable that these scheduled tribes or the indigenous people, they have their distinct culture, their distinct subsistence pattern and livelihood. However, they have been living in poverty for ages. Their rights have been suppressed through various processes, and their culture has been ignored. They also have been subject to forced displacement from their own lands on which they have been dependent on. For ages, they have migrated from one place to another, but in most of the cases, they have been forced to do so because of the development projects, and also mining, also some sort of mining initiated by the government, and some forest and land policies enacted from time to time. They also have been exploited by non-tribes, especially those who are techno-economically and politically more advanced than the indigenous people of India. But now my main point of speech that comes that uh, why such situation? Why such situation uh, uh, of the indigenous people of India? Why they have been suffering with all these things? And though researchers and even administrators have attempted for years to identify the factors why the tribes of India are lagging behind, despite a good number of developmental plans and programs meant for them. So, in my speech, I will attempt to answer these important questions: that why the tribes of India have failed to access the government plans and programs, in short, which can be called affirmative action or positive discrimination. So I have, in my case, I have identified 4 factors which are mostly responsible for this. So the first one is that the ripe fruits are captured, often snatched by the educated tribals and rural elites. So that is the number one factor. Number two factor is tribals have not yet been habituated with the market economy. My third factor is the lack of proper planning and implementation of tribal development plans from the side of the government. And the fourth factor is the lack of sympathetic mainstream society. Uh, so I'm discussing them one after another, and I will not take much time. The first one is that this the right fruits. I mean to say these development plans and programs, the fruits of these plans, these are captured, often snatched by the educated tribals and rural elites. So I'm giving here a case. Alpha Shah, a renowned professor of anthropology at the London School of Economics, conducted an in-depth research on the newly formed Jharkhand state of India. The state was formed in the year 2000 in demands of and to facilitate the majority of the indigenous people living there. Alpha Shah asked a question. She began her research with a question that who got the benefits of the newly formed state. So her she did her research uh, for a couple of years, and she found that it is the educated tribals and their children who mostly access the benefits of the state machinery. And she also her research also revealed that it is the rural non-tribal elites who snatches the contractorship to execute tribal development plans, such as building houses, construction of roads, and so on. So that is the number one factor that why the tribals still are lagging behind. The number two factor is that the tribals have not yet habituated with the market economy. I'm just giving another case. Uh, another instance. The Meruna Mermu, a tribal herself and a professor of Jadavpur University of India, she published an article in a daily newspaper where she asserted that the tribals of India or the indigenous people of India were habituated with the reciprocal mode of exchange and did not have the business mindset. So because of these reasons, they have lost their lands and suffered from poverty during the British India and also in independent India. But here I add that not only this reciprocal exchange in terms of economy, but the indigenous people of India, they also have a kind of their distinct mode of production, distribution, and consumptions, which are extremely different from those of the market economy. And the traditional political organizations the indigenous people have, which these are also very much different from the mainstream politics of India. So this is one of the reasons, I think, perhaps the most important reasons why the tribal or the indigenous people of India, they have not been able to get the fruits of these affirmative actions or positive discrimination. The the third factor that I was talking about, that it is a kind of lack of the proper planning and the implementation regarding this tribal developmental plans. So I'm giving here an example that former Prime Minister of India, Mr. Rajiv Gandhi, he once visited a drought affected and tribal dominated or district of India that is dominated by the indigenous people of India. But during that time, it was drought affected. That was in the year 1985. So his famous remark was that the government allot they allot rupees 1 for the downtrodden people, for the development of the downtrodden people, but only rupees, only 15 paise, I mean, only 50% of the allotted money, it reaches to the people to whom it was meant for. So, and there are hundreds of researches which suggest that that it is only the lack of the proper planning and the proper implementation that the indigenous people of India, they are, I mean, they are still underdeveloped. And um, as I have to finish very quickly, so I'm talking about the last factor, that we also need a kind of sympathetic or a kind of well-aware mainstream society. A famous tribal uh, writer, I mean, who also belongs to the indigenous community of uh, India, Virginia Skaka. He wrote an interesting article where uh, where he argued that the mainstream society and also uh, the academics, they fail to understand a very important point, that the tribal society or the society of the indigenous people, it is very much to any other kind of the societies of the world. So this simple, I mean, this simple point, that the tribal society is also a kind of any other society of the world. So it is definitely prone to change, and it is also definitely not homogeneous. The people, uh, uh, I mean, the world around the tribal people, that is changing, and tribal people, they will also definitely change. So, and we fail to understand this hard reality. Okay, so, and also one more challenge is that a growing number of population these days and across India, they are demanding for a kind of scheduled tribe status, and this is very much uh, contrary to the situation which was about 30 to 40 years ago, when uh, this is the same group of people, they were demanding for higher identities, and now uh, I mean, uh, the trend is going to some extent in the opposite direction. So these are the four factors that I think uh, should be taken into consideration. So when we talk about the I mean, the development of the indigenous people of India, and also when we talk about the sustainable development goals. So that's all from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Kisku, for your presentation. I'll request Professor Roy to have his comment, please. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Kisku. Incidentally, Professor Kisku has raised different issue away from the climate change, but that was very important, that in India, of the nearly 700 tribal community, 75 are PPTG. And what are the features of PPTG, why they are particularly vulnerable. He raised the issue on the term indigenous, how this is used, Adivashi or not Adivashi. In India, the tribal communities are listed, and that list is, according to the government of India, scheduled tribe, they are enrolled over there. So there has been controversy, and of course, Supreme Court has mentioned that tribal community are the indigenous. These are the things he has raised. Is very important, but we wish he could also share some of the issue, how the cultural knowledge, traditional knowledge can help in the climate resilient tribal development. This is the issue we have been discussing. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Kishore. for sharing. Very important point. Very important point.
Okay, thank you very much.
Professor Roy, we have seen some questions written in the chat box. So, and unfortunately, our last speaker, Mr. Jeffrey Y. Campbell, he couldn't join us due to some unforeseen reasons. So, now should we go with the questions and you wrap up?
I think yes. Yeah.
Okay.
We can pick up some of the questions and
Okay.
let each one, the speaker
Yeah.
will answer.
Yes, yes. So, the question, one question is for Daniel. Daniel, are you there? Daniel, are you there?
Yes.
Okay, okay, Daniel. This is for you. Like, the question was that you have raised very pertinent questions. It is an unfair competition between corporate world and indigenous world in terms of basic healthcare facilities, is it not? So, what is your comment on that? On this unfair?
Well,
yeah.
thank you. Thank you. That's a very good question. Let me discuss in the aspect that we are not really in competition with the corporate world because we are unique in our own standards. This is just, I can say it is normal competition because if you want to be healed, you are sick. I think you go where you feel more comfortable and more affordable. More often than not, indigenous people's treatment is not expensive. Sometimes even it is done without much profit. So most of the healing, especially in our communities, is that people give you medicine and they say, when you get well, you can decide to give something in consideration. And it may not be monetary. Somebody can take maybe 20 kilos of honey, or maybe a goat or a cow or something which to thank the person who gave the medicine. The only thing which sometimes they give a bit of competition is some of the people from who are indigenous, some of them also decide to make it like a business, which also sometimes goes against the culture values. And then there is what we call value addition. Some now are grinding or making some of the herbs in terms of capsules or tablets. And then now that creates a bit of competition. But this is something which anybody can also discuss, and the panelists can give their comments, because it is something which affects a lot of indigenous peoples, especially now that the conventional medicine say, oh, don't go because the kind of measurements or for the medicine is different. Maybe the quantities which you are being given, the time frame that after 7 days, one time is 3, one time is 2, the tablets, the way they are given. Maybe for the herbs you are given maybe 5 liters, and you are told when you are through taking the herbs, you will be well. So I don't know whether I've been able to answer your question, but thank you very much.
Daniel, anybody else like Buba or Saru, would you like to share anything on this point? What Daniel has mentioned? Or the next question is for, yeah, Saru is telling something. Please, Saru, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know whether I got the question well. Can you just cast the question again?
Yeah, the question what the Daniel was addressing is whether if there is a competition between this corporate world and the indigenous world in terms of having basic health care facilities.
Yeah, I think I mean, coming from Nigeria, I think the problem had been that the issue is not about effectiveness of traditional medicine. The problem had been that over the years, particularly with when the colonizers came, every attempt was made to demonize traditional medicine.
Hello?
Substandard, but I think part of what some of us are trying to do now as a child is to make people realize that this medicine are effective. The only area that is also a challenge is the whole question of commodification of nature and with the capital and selling. Most of our communities never see these natural resources as things that should be put on the market. In the sense of the community we live in, I know that there were several common ailments that my grandmother used to give to me. If I'm sick of malaria, they go to the forest, pluck this leaf, and give me to use in bathing. And by the time I bathe 1 or 2 or 3 times, malaria is gone. So what I think we are doing more is to make people now to realize that this thing is okay, this is safe, this thing can be used without any demonization that have been attached to it. So for me, the biggest campaign to see how we stop demonizing traditional medicine, which for me is the biggest challenge here.
Yeah, very, very important issue, that how the traditional medicine is branded and how we can rebrand it. Thank you so much, Saru. The next question is meant for Yosef. Are you there, Yosef? Gerima?
Can you hear me?
Yeah. The
Thank you very
question
much.
is whether the conservation plan that is prepared is being accepted by or consulted with the community, and how is the working plan to make it successful?
Yeah, when we talk about the plan, yes, the communities are engaged and accepted, they are usually consulted and they actively participate in the conservation plan. But the challenge is not there. The challenge comes afterward. So, because in order to understand what's coming afterward, we need to understand the cause. And because majorly this deforestation is happening, there are 2 leading causes here in Ethiopia especially. One is expansion of agriculture areas, and also the other one is fuel. So they are using woods as a source of fuel. So once people are engaged in the conservation practice, once we do this area closure activities, of course, the communities are engaged very well, but the challenge comes afterwards. So in order to make it more successful, there are different alternative strategies. The first one is creative alternative source. For example, rather than expanding areas, help farmers at the local level to produce more from the area that they already have, rather than expanding lands. The other one is, of course, introducing alternative cooking methods. And also, through the process, especially when you engage these conservation practices, the communities, they really need an income from that, immediate income from that activities, from their engagement. So we usually, as a project, for example, we support farmers to engage in beekeeping activities, sheep and goat rearing activities with a revolving fund, so that we can reach a lot of communities, and we keep them engaged in that conservation measure activities. So other income sources like poultry farming also, which can engage and also link with the natural activities. So promoting these income generation sources and creating alternative sources will hopefully make it more successful and sustainable.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, yourself. The next question is meant to Professor Amit Kumar Kisku. So there are two questions. I'm putting the two questions together. First was like, is indigenous people synonymous with scheduled tribe in India? This is the first question, whether indigenous people are synonymous with scheduled tribe in India in legal terms. And the second question is, how do you assess the impact of legislation like Forest Rights Act, which recognizes the community rights over its forest resources and have the potential of recognizing about 40 million hectares of forest land of the local forest communities?
I think the answer of the second question has been already given by Arati Nandi, what I can say. Yeah, that was the kind of thing I wanted to say. And regarding, I think that question was also asked by Arati Nandi, that whether the indigenous people, whether the term indigenous people is synonymous to the scheduled tribe of India. Constitutionally, we have in India, we have the term scheduled tribes, but we do not have the term Adivasi and indigenous people in our constitution. So, so far it is okay. But what we also accept, that is the order of the Supreme Court. So Supreme Court, that order that I mentioned, that was in 2011. Supreme Court said that word, used that word tribes and Adivasis synonymously. Okay, and I also mentioned that the term Adivasi, that is it's an Indianized version of the term indigenous people. So so in that sense, it is very much synonymous. Like we to the common tribals, if you go to the villages, to the common tribals, it is very difficult for them to utter that word, we are indigenous people, but they can very easily say that no, we are Adivasi. So that's the kind of the Indianized version of the term indigenous people. So in that sense, it is very much synonymous. And I'm also just the professor, I think at the end, just after the end of my my presentation, Professor S.B. Roy, he concerned about the fact that we actually are discussing about the how the cultural knowledge or indigenous knowledge, how that can help in self-development group. A sustainable development goals, to attain sustainable development goals. Yeah, and I should have focused on that, but I think I got a bit diverted because that thing was very much in my mind. Yeah, that thing was very much in my mind. So we have already discussed a lot, written a lot of books and articles that have been written on how rich is indigenous knowledge and how rich is the cultural knowledge of the tribal people or the indigenous people of India. So that much we have discussed. I mean, even this. So we already know this. The tribal people, they have a very good knowledge of medicinal plants, but
Yes,
what is going on even in the interiors of Madhya Pradesh, Odisha, and other regions? Tribal peoples are being involved to collect those medicinal plants. They are being collected by local contractors, and that is being transported to the international market to make to make medicines, and that is being sold with a huge amount of money. So, but I mean, the tribal people or the indigenous people, they are getting almost no benefits from this kind of things. And why these people are not getting these benefits? And my concern was that these people, they have still yet to gain the knowledge of, I mean, that the I mean, how this market economy works, how this yeah, they still have to learn how this market works, no? So that's what I was trying to say in my presentation. Yeah, but anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I have
This is
seen
what
Mr.
Rakima,
Tak.
yeah.
He has raised a hand. Javed Ahmad Tak. Do you have any question, Mr. Tak? Because of the paucity of time, we can just take one question more, and then we will.
Hi, and this
Yes,
is Javed from Kashmir. I just want to know
Okay.
about when we talk of the indigenous people, we have some people who are more underprivileged because of their disability. How will we ensure that inclusion of person with disability should happen in these circumstances? And inclusion should not be just for the sake of nameplate or the showcase, but inclusion of rights of person with disability should be in the G20 activities. I just want to have a few words from the presenters because they have really opened our eyes. They have given us a lot of information. But when we see the people living in the peripheries or in the inaccessible conditions, there are persons with disabilities whose rights also need to be safeguarded. Thank you.
Thank you for raising the question. Actually, this is beyond this scope of discussion for today, but the issue that you have raised, it's of course very pertinent, and maybe we will have another round of discussion focusing on that. Thank you very much, Mr. Tak. There were two more issues raised here, how this issue of stigmatizing certain communities and denotified tribal communities. These are two issues that is raised, and this is like that. So Professor Roy or Professor Kisku, would you like to share anything on these two issues? How this stigmatization of certain tribal communities are creating a kind of a problem, not helping in inclusion of them in the development?
I think Dr. Amit Kushku can throw light on that. And I appreciate Dr. Amit Kushku was he added few important points about the indigenous knowledge, the community who are having the knowledge, who are involved in collection of medicinal plant and what kind of benefit they are getting. That is, of course, related to our topic, because over exploitation of the biodiversity and this kind of deprivation will not help in conservation, because over exploitation in any form will not help in conservation. And the third point he mentioned, are they getting the real value of what they are extracting? This is another issue. If they don't get the value, it will be against the nature's law, not only against the nature law. I mean, this is against the Biological Diversity Act 2002, where the committee, the local committee, biodiversity committee, is responsible for equitable sharing and engagement of indigenous people in conservation and sustainable harvesting. So we have to abide by that act. If you abide by, then equitable benefit to the tribal community. That's very, very important. This is this.
Yeah. So
And regarding other part, this is beyond the scope of today's discussion.
So may I request you, Professor Roy, to kindly wrap up the session and conclude? And I'll request all of our speakers then to kindly switch on their video. We will have a group photograph together. Yes, Professor.
Okay, thank you very much, Raktima. Most of the speakers, when they spoke, we had our comment after each speaker. I must tell 2-3 salient points. Look at that when the world is discussing over G20, global issue, very important issues. And we have also seen that till today, the most knowledgeable people, head of organization and the country, who represent the country, they are unable to come to the agreement on the climate change issue, who will pay what. While they are struggling and the knowledgeable people are unable to come to the agreement, the indigenous people, wherever they are, say in African country or where they are, there you will find the least emission, least pollution, much better conservation. This is what we have to learn. And the world should also know from them. This is one. We all have shared very important point. I'm not going to repeat. What I'm going to tell that look at the amount of money spent on the research, scientific research institution. Look at the amount of money spent on the publication of the research paper on the climate change, biodiversity. Did you see how many thousands of papers are published? How many knowledgeable people are coming? But what is the situation? The more knowledgeable people and more climate problem in this decade. Whereas whom we call indigenous people are not the person who are considered the most knowledgeable in the world, but they are the people who have shown how to conserve, how to have a least emission, and how to protect the earth, make in harmony, respect each other, live with the community. That is the humanity. So this is what I want to share, that we have to learn more from the indigenous people, how they are making the harmony. And finally, today's discussion, particularly all of them, I request Saro or other to have a network of sharing. And I propose, Raktima, if possible, if they agree, we can have a kind of a, not a webinar of 15-20 minutes, rather we can have a training program. And this will be conducted by your group from a country. So one country discussion at one day, and we can have a module. So it will be very important of knowledge sharing and documentation. This is what I propose. And then the scientific knowledge, indigenous knowledge, and the local community will have a transdisciplinary knowledge, a blending of indigenous knowledge, scientific knowledge in the field tested module. This is what is required. Indigenous knowledge with the scientific knowledge blended with the training module. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Roy. And what you have suggested, actually, I was also having this thing in my mind, like to propose before the group to have a kind of understanding, networking amongst ourselves, where we can discuss more in a more detailed manner, learn from you. And as Professor Roy has discussed, it will be kind of, if you all agree, and if you think, Daniel, Saro, Buba, yourself, if you think like it will be helping, then we can have a kind of a training series. And what you have said, actually that concept, that philosophy, that needs to be promoted, that needs to be discussed, the creating balance, creating harmony, which is the basic of achieving the sustainable development goals as well. What you have said today, if we can't promote those values, those philosophies, we cannot achieve the goal of sustainable development. So if you all agree, then we can share with you and plan a kind of a monthly, maybe once a month. We can dedicate 12 months for 12 countries. So a country talk kind of thing. So country specific training program. If you agree, we can discuss in detail. Daniel, what do you think? Saro, Buba, Yosef? So we can discuss and then we can share and have this kind of mutual partnership and learning. What you, all of you have said, that partnership of ourselves and community specific learning from different countries. So thank you very much. Thank you all our esteemed panelists for your excellent presentations, insights that you have shared with us. And as Professor Roy has mentioned, that this is not a end, but it is a kind of a beginning of a journey together for learning, for sharing, for mutual understanding, sharing, mutual respect, and recognizing the strength of each other. So thank you once again. And tomorrow we are going to publish one of our, just a second. We are going to publish our one of our newsletter, Nature and Culture. And I'm very happy to have news from Daniel and Buba from Cameroon and Kenya. So we will be sharing with you the newsletter whose purpose is to document a kind of sharing of initiatives, actions from different parts of the world on conservation of nature, biodiversity, ecosystems, and the culture of the communities, particularly the indigenous communities, that would help us in achieving a sustainable future. So thank you very much for your contribution,
Thank you so
for your
much.
partnership. Thank you.
Thank you
Looking
so
forward
much.
to meeting you
Okay,
again.
okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you
Thank
all.
you.
Thank
Bye,
you,
Buba.
Professor Roy.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you
Professor
so much,
Bye.
Buba.
Bye.
Thank you,
Bye.
Buba.
Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank
Thank
you so
you.
much. Thank you.
Great.
Bye.
Great.
Bye.
Great. Yeah. Can you switch off all of you? Have you taken Raktima
Yeah,
photograph?
I have taken.
Take this time now of photograph.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'll also take one more. Yeah.
Arjuna, yeah. Once, yeah.
Yeah.
Javed, Saurabh, Devashish, all, yeah. Very good.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay.
Bye.
Bye, Aruna.
Bye.